Okay, today we're going to be exploring Killers of the Flower Moon, the book versus the movie, and we're going to be kind of diving into the whole classic debate of the book will always be better than the movies, or the movie is better than the book. We're going to see what the heck is up with that from my perspective, because I have a pretty strong opinion about this, and I want to see if anybody else can agree or has a different perspective to me, whatever. My channel is a very casual channel. I go over anything kind of casual or monumental in relation to life and media and anything pop culture. So I just want to talk about Killers of the Flower Moon because I recently read the movie, watched the book. Okay, so if you see me looking kind of off to the side, it's because I have notes here. I do not want to miss anything important because this is a very important story to get correct. Killers of the Flower Moon is a non-fiction book based in the 20s off of the Osage murders. If I accidentally say Osage, it's because I accidentally read it as Osage the whole entire book, and this book took me like 2 weeks to read. Just to kind of run it down, simplify it, to give you kind of a very simple introduction, even though like I'm assuming if you're on this video you know exactly what the heck the story pertains to, but in case you're not, and in case maybe if you're not interested in knowing and you just kind of want to be spoiled, I'll just go ahead and spoil this for you. The book is a true story. It's classified as true crime based on the murders of the Osage Nation, which was at one point one of the wealthiest nations of their time. A lot of members from the Osage Nation ended up being murdered, and the whole entire book is kind of deciphering why members were being murdered, because they were one of the wealthiest members of the world. It's not really dissecting why they were murdered because everybody wanted the Osage's wealth around them who weren't Osage. It was mainly dissecting who and how these murders were happening. After they had been incredibly neglected, we throughout the book are kind of figuring out the story of how these murders were being uncovered. It was being exposed that these murders were being kind of pushed under the rug. So that's a little bit about the book. Although the book and movie were so incredibly beautifully presented, I remember reading the book just being reminded the reason why it's so important to read books that are outside of your typical genres. I don't really like history that much due to the fact that as an African immigrant, being in America, sitting in history classes, sometimes being the only Black kid hearing about history and like sometimes sitting through, it's like hard to listen to history, to watch history, to feel proud of American history. But I liked this story specifically because it was focused on justice. Both the book and the movie are beautifully presented, but I honestly just do prefer the book. I prefer the book even though I'm not interested in history as much, because this was paced like a thriller. This really kept me kind of guessing as to what was going to happen, and that's kind of sad to say for a true story based in murders that really happened. But the way that the information was presented was in such a way that it was just so intriguing to know what was happening, how. And honestly, just gonna be real, a large reason as to why I read this book was because it was an Academy Award winner and they got Mr. Leo playing in it. Sorry, but I came out of it really feeling inspired to read more stories like this. So in this video, of course, I'm going to be expanding on the differences between the movie versus the book, and then ending off on the way that the movie disappointed me, which you're going to find in some of the differences like automatic disappointment, but I just wanted to be very clear. The book's events are just much more interesting to follow. I feel like the way that David Grann, who was the author of this, presented the information, he could have laid this out in a very hard to follow way, in a very boring way. I would read 1,000 history books if they were set up like this. The book details why it's called Killers of the Flower Moon, who the Osage were, how they got their wealth. It gives a rundown of all of the characters and gives physical description as well as photos, which amazing. It details the Reign of Terrors, were like the reign of all of the killings that were happening. It gives a lot of information into the investigations. Also, in the title mentions the birth of the FBI. And yeah, it does give a lot of information as to how the FBI was kind of forming in this time. Also, what I really, really appreciate about the book, which I thought I didn't need to know about, but was really appreciative, was the aftermath of everything. So after the murder trial happened, after the person was, honestly, they did not get enough consequence, but after the person served their time, what happened to the community, what happened to Molly, what happened to her descendants. They did spotlight that a little bit in the movie, they did, but not to the detail of which David Grann did. Throughout the whole entire book, you feel like you're reading like a story that's not real. And then at the very end, you're like, these are dates that are happening in 2012, 2015. History informs the present. And that, to me, I feel like was a little bit lost in the movie, but it needed to be its own thing in the movie, I guess. First thing that stood out to me about the differences of the book versus the movie is that the movie leaves out a ton of details, informational and educational details that I really appreciated learning in the book. I will say that it's probably very difficult for Mr. Scorsese to figure out how to present the information as best he can in a very accurate way without it feeling like too educational and with it being true to a story that, you know, like he makes. So I'm not critiquing him and his artistic vision because it turned out well for him. He won an Oscar, whatever. I just think these are just my opinions that I want to see if anybody will catch them. What I will say is they really didn't shed as much of a light as to how the government played a role into the Osage, because I feel like they did show us moments of what was mentioned in the book, but they didn't really go into, you know, detailing the specific laws of what the Osage could or couldn't do. So I'm just gonna kind of explain what I felt was missing. So the government had nearly full control of the Osage and how the Osage lived. It's implied in some scenes, of course, you know, when Molly would go to request certain money out of her bank account, and she would have to say Molly Burkhart, incompetent, which was hard to watch. So like you could tell from that scene that she had to state herself as incompetent, and that must be kind of a policy as it relates to accessing the wealth, but it just was not laid out. When Molly was growing up, this is what I read in the book, they controlled not only the land, but the access to food and the education that they were receiving as well. The Osage, originally from Kansas, moved down to Oklahoma. The government bought out their land. Instead of making typical payments, the government would say, hey, we're going to pay you in clothing and rations of food. And we're also going to give you multiple policies to follow. And we're going to heavily restrict your land and make you assimilate to being more like us. They'd restrict their payments and make able-bodied people in the Osage Nation work and like take up farming in a way that wasn't traditional to them. Their life was given strict conditions. The opening scene of the movie, I'm assuming, was like either a ritual or meeting or ceremony, but it was mentioned that they were kind of mourning the fact that their children would grow up not in Osage tradition through white Oklahoma and Catholic traditions. They didn't mention that in the book specifically, but they were kind of just saying, oh, our children will not really be raised as ours. But in the book, what I read was that in order for them to keep certain things in their land, in order for them to keep the payment that they were receiving, they forced the Osage children into the Oklahoman white Catholic missionary schools, didn't let them speak the Osage language, and forced them to get rid of their traditional garb and to wear like plain white dresses. When the Osage got wealth, they had to be, of course, assigned or identified as incompetent. I think that was for the full Osage. I can't remember who, if anybody, was looked at as like an exception, but essentially all Osage had a guardian. They would have to state themselves as incompetent. They would have to give reasons as to why they could access their money and like what they needed to buy. At a certain point in the movie, Molly is buying like basic things, like things that are needed, that are not luxurious items. And even if they were luxurious items, she just can't. So yeah, they couldn't manage their own money, and that was shown in the movie, but I don't think it was explained. They were just given some random Oklahoman guardian that would say, I think that's a good decision, I don't think that's a good decision, simply because of racism. And many of the guardians took advantage of that. This is crucial to American history. But yeah, I feel like that should have been highlighted in some way, but I also understand, Martin, it's your vision. Another difference in the movie versus the book is that the book brings intrigue because they are solving murders as the book progresses, whereas the movie kind of just tells you. I didn't really like that the movie spoiled the murders immediately, because the book, it was so interesting to read. Oh, who are the people? Why are the people being hunted? Oh, it's obvious why the people are being hunted. How are they being hunted? What's causing all of this? How were they able to be treated so poorly? How was the government, there were so many moving parts that came together so beautifully in the book that it never made me confused or wonder. The book gives you what it can, it doesn't breadcrumb you, it gives you what it can as the information is able to be accessed. And then the movie just straight up tells you. Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Ernest, comes straight out looking for work, looking to work for the wealthiest people of their time. His uncle is like, hey, you like any type of women? And he's like, yeah. He's like, listen, I have a proposition for you. How about you get close to a woman, we make her incredibly wealthy, make her so wealthy that one day she can transfer that wealth to you if we murder her whole entire family. How's that sound to you? And then he's like, I mean, I'm on board. That was the whole, it was so quick, the plot that was given. I didn't love that. I didn't, because the book felt like a ride that you wanted to learn about and you were educated through, and it wasn't boring. It was I felt like from reading the book and then watching the movie, I felt bored. Ultimately the book was just I would so rather recommend the book than the movie. The third thing, the book does not mention Ernest Burkhart having nearly as big a role as the movie does. Was a genuine shock to me. I don't know if it was maybe to anybody else. It was Ernest that would have, been the perspective of this movie. When in the book, I forgot even that William Hale and Ernest, were completely behind this thing, because they were piecing things together and not mentioning Ernest in every single page. It was you'd go a couple chapters without reading about them, honestly, because as you were figuring out the mystery, as you were kind of putting it together, there would be times where it would just be mention of the FBI, of Molly, of the first detective that failed to figure it out because he died. There were so many things going on outside of Ernest and William, even though they, conspired to do this all together, worked together, that it was kind of the end part that solidified, oh, he really ain't. He really is not nothing. If you had asked any reader before they watched the movie, or just a reader who doesn't know anything about the movie, which I doubt, I'm pretty sure everybody would say the movie would probably be based off of Molly's perspective and not Ernest's, Fourth thing, the movie was much harder to watch than it was for me to read the book. Granted, the book was a little hard to read in the way that I read kind of easy to read things, I feel. Sometimes I'll read something that'll take me a little while to finish. But for the most part, I'm not sitting here reading Infinite Jest. I'm sitting here reading an easy thriller that's popular and kind of fun and easy to get through. This was not incredibly easy to get through because it was so packed full of information. Granted, it was a little hard to read, but it was harder to actually watch some of the murders happen, knowing that they're based on a real story. It was really hard for me to watch Anna die. It was really hard for me to watch any of the murders take place, because knowing that they're recreating something that was a real life event is difficult if you're a sensitive person. I'm very emotionally tied to literally everything I hear. So the fact that you could see what probably happened, not what probably happened, what happened and was probably being mimicked, not incredibly accurate, but maybe, is really hard to reckon with. And that to me is the epitome of why I just can't do historical pieces that are based in, murders of a mass group, because it's hard to reckon with. It's hard to sit with the truth, and it's hard to watch the truth. And that's what made it difficult and easier to read as a book. Because in the book, you do recognize this as truth, but the truth is like a lot more objective and easy to digest. We're ending off on why I thought the movie was disappointing, even though I literally probably already spilled all of that information. There's a YouTube video in the description that details so many good points as to why this movie is a little bit more disappointing than I thought it was going to be. I agree with every single part. Imagine I just ended there. So that's why the movie was disappointing. Just go watch that other YouTube video. No, but I really wish that the movie was as intriguing as the book. And I know I already said that, but there's beauty in it being from Ernest's perspective. And there's beauty from the fact that you have to just sit with all of these people dying and knowing that you like love your wife and like seeing the evil like soul of a human and seeing the greed just play out and watching Molly grieve death after death after death was hard. And I think that Martin did a good job of showcasing that, because it wasn't like a movie that you want to watch again because you're like, that made me kind of doubt my faith in humanity. But I will say, I just feel like it would just be a lot more liberating if we had seen the movie from Molly's perspective, because the book wasn't from Molly's perspective, but it was from Molly's, like, the book triumphs Molly because she's one of the only survivors of the reigns of terror. And this is going to sound stupid, but you're essentially rooting for her to stay alive because you know that like she is one of the last people. And throughout the book, you could see like how it could easily be translated into a movie, and how if we had seen it from Molly's eyes, we'd be like, how was this person dying? How was this person dying? How am I going to deal with these emotions? All I have is my husband. Oh, my husband is murdering all of these people and conspiring with one of our most trusted family members who knows our language and killing them. I would love, Martin, just hear me out. If we could have just made this from Molly's perspective, I just think it would be a lot more liberating. I know, Martin, you did what you did and you are getting Oscars for it. But I'm just kind of disappointed in that way, because I just felt like, as somebody who read the book, it's not fun to watch a predictable movie. It's fun to watch a movie that's so beautifully shot, that the cinematography was so like, it had such a clear vision, but it's hard to watch because like you're being told exactly what's going to happen. And yeah, so that's my comparison of Killers of the Flower Moon, the book versus the movie.